Today, we're unpacking the anatomy of a modern geopolitical crisis, the escalating tensions between the United States and Iran. We're going to break down exactly how these immense, world-shifting events actually unfold, step by step, from the absolute highest levels of government right down to everyday citizens. I want you to imagine the intense, dark, cinematic aesthetic of a high-stakes geopolitical thriller, because honestly, that's the exact atmosphere surrounding this scenario. We're going to deconstruct the mechanics of this conflict completely impartially, just to understand the sheer force of the variables at play here. Now, to truly understand a crisis like this, you have to look at the global baseline first. We live in a world that's, well, already filled with tension and uncertainty. I mean, before a single new event even occurs, the stage is set with these chaotic scenes. Picture crowded, bustling cities just going about their day, suddenly interrupted by glaring breaking news alerts on every screen. Imagine military bases quietly but rapidly preparing for action, and world leaders stepping up to microphones under immense visible pressure. Look, this isn't just background noise. This existing global anxiety, it's the fuel that makes any news spark so incredibly volatile. It immediately plunges us right into the intense reality of modern global affairs. Which brings us to the core question driving our focus today. What happens when decades of distrust finally boil over on the modern global stage? Okay, let's dive into this. A crisis of this magnitude doesn't just happen overnight. No way. It's the result of really complex underlying mechanics and variables slowly grinding against each other over time until the friction just becomes too much. To understand the breaking point, we really have to understand the buildup. Section 1. History of the conflict. The roots of the crisis. We can actually trace this escalation over some very distinct eras. It starts with deep-seated political disagreements and fundamental ideological clashes dating back decades, most notably to the 1979 revolution and the subsequent hostage crisis. Over time, that transitions into a period dominated by severe economic sanctions, specifically aimed at crippling financial resources to enforce nuclear deterrence. Then, the timeline really starts to heat up with direct, localized military incidents and escalating regional proxy conflicts. And all of this, it culminates in the ultimate catalyst, a profound, totally immovable foundation of growing distrust. It's like a compounding timeline where every single decade basically inherits the unresolved baggage of the last, marked by sweeping maps of the Middle East, massive aircraft carriers cutting through the ocean, and just mounting fear. Section 2. The ripple effect. Global reactions. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens next. Because the moment tensions spike, we see an immediate, almost violent economic reflex. A disruption in a critical choke point, like the Strait of Hormuz, for example, directly causes surging global oil prices. That instantly triggers stock market panic as investors brace for supply chain disruptions. Diplomatically, you've got global leaders urgently hitting the phones and the podiums calling for peace. Culturally, social media debates absolutely explode, instantly polarizing the globe, which then spills right over into actual physical protests erupting in major cities worldwide. All the while, worldwide news analysis goes into total overdrive. A localized geopolitical event is literally experienced simultaneously by financial markets, digital algorithms, and people on the streets thousands of miles away. Section 3. Modern Warfare and Intelligence. Escalating the tension. So the crucial point to remember here is that a modern crisis between these two nations isn't just fought with boots on the ground anymore. Not even close. The reality is advanced cyber warfare, incredibly complex intelligence operations, and persistent 24/7 satellite monitoring. The real suspense is built in the shadows. Imagine the strategic military planning rooms, the covert operations, and glowing screens tracking digital attacks on critical infrastructure. Similar to the historic Stuxnet virus. This is the realistic, intense military visual of the 21st century. It's objective, it's calculating, and it's completely silent. Before a physical shot is ever even fired, a massive, invisible war is already being waged right now in server rooms and low Earth orbit. Section 4. The human cost. Behind the headlines. Now, I want to slow down for a second, because there is a really stark contrast at play here. On one side, you have the cold, calculating environment of the strategic war room. That's the analytical, detached world of cyber warfare, satellite monitoring, and high-level strategic planning we just talked about. But on the exact opposite side is the human reality. And this is what brings the true weight of the crisis home. The focus suddenly shifts to families agonizing over a totally uncertain future. It's young soldiers packing their gear and preparing for deployment. It's ordinary people, regardless of what country they live in, just quietly praying for peace.
When you contrast those cold intelligence operations with the intimate, visceral fears of everyday citizens, that's when you understand the true anatomy of a crisis. It's not just about moving pieces around on a giant geopolitical chessboard. It's about the very real human lives that those pieces represent.
Section 5. 4 possible outcomes. Where does this leave? Let's move to and see how this builds, because every crisis eventually reaches a crossroads. Path 1 is the hope of diplomatic peace talks, leaders somehow finding a way back to the negotiating table to maybe revive frameworks similar to past nuclear accords. Path 2 involves severe economic consequences. Even if a direct war is avoided, financial shockwaves and strict sanctions are going to leave a massive, lasting mark on global trade and inflation. Path 3 points to prolonged regional instability. The map of the Middle East remains fractured, and local proxy conflicts might actually intensify. And finally, Path 4. This is the darkest one. The very real risk of global escalation, where allies and superpowers are basically dragged into a widening, catastrophic conflict. These are the 4 doors standing at the end of the timeline, and the entire globe is just holding its breath, waiting to see which one gets opened. Ultimately, it comes down to this. In today's connected world, every conflict affects millions. The future depends not only on power, but on decisions made in moments of tension. I want to just let that linger for a second. It perfectly captures the ultimate takeaway of our analysis today. We do not live in isolated bubbles. The fragile interconnectedness of our modern world means that decisions made by just a handful of people sitting in a high-pressure room cascade down to affect literally millions of lives globally. It's a sobering reminder that true leadership isn't just about wielding power. It's about the wisdom exercised when the tension is at its absolute razor-sharp peak. Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought. How are your own daily life and choices connected to these fragile geopolitical decisions? Because honestly, from the price of the gas you put in your car, to the security of your digital data, right down to the overall stability of the world you live in, you are directly linked to these grand geopolitical chess moves. As you go about your day-to-day, just remember that the forces shaping the globe are absolutely shaping your reality too. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. And as always, keep questioning the world around you.